The grand ballroom of the Beverly Hills Hotel sparkled like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting rainbow lights across the marble floor. Women in expensive dresses walked carefully in high heels. Men wore black suits that cost more than most people's cars. Everyone here had money. Lots of money. This was the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala. Rich people came here every year to write big checks and feel good about themselves. They ate tiny foods with fancy names and drank champagne that cost hundreds of dollars per bottle. The music was soft and classical, played by a small orchestra in the corner. Victoria Sterling stood near the main entrance, watching people arrive. She wore a black dress that fit her perfectly. Her dark hair was pulled back tight. Her makeup was perfect. Everything about her looked expensive and controlled. Victoria was 32 years old and had been playing piano since she was 4. She was very good at it, so good that people paid thousands of dollars to hear her play. Victoria had studied at the best music schools. She went to Juilliard in New York, where only the very best students could go. She had played at Carnegie Hall 3 times. Famous orchestras asked her to play with them. Music critics wrote good things about her in newspapers. She was proud of all this, very proud. But Victoria had a problem. She thought she was better than everyone else. She looked down on people who had not studied music like her. She especially did not like celebrities who pretended to know about classical music. Victoria believed that real music was serious music. It took years of hard work to understand it. Movie stars and singers who made pop music were not real musicians. In her mind, tonight, Victoria was here because the charity had asked her to play piano later in the evening. They would pay her well for it. She would play some beautiful classical pieces, and everyone would clap. Then she could go home. But first, she had to smile and talk to these rich people. She did not like this part of her job. Victoria picked up a glass of champagne from a waiter who walked by. The bubbles tickled her nose as she drank. She looked around the room with her sharp green eyes. She knew some of the people here. There was the oil company owner who had a wife half his age. There was the tech billionaire who never smiled. There was the movie producer who made terrible action films. Then Victoria saw someone who made her stop drinking her champagne. In the far corner of the room, sitting alone at a small round table, was Keanu Reeves. Victoria knew who he was. Of course, everyone knew Keanu Reeves. He was famous for action movies like John Wick and The Matrix. But he was different from other movie stars. He seemed quieter, more serious. Keanu sat very still at his table. He wore a simple black suit that was nice but not fancy. His dark hair was a little messy, like he had been running his hands through it. He was not talking to anyone. He was not looking at his phone like everyone else. Instead, he was staring at something across the room. Victoria followed his gaze and saw what he was looking at. The grand piano. It sat on a small stage at the front of the ballroom. The piano was beautiful, all black and shiny. Its lid was open, showing the strings inside. It was the same type of piano Victoria had been playing her whole life. But why? Was Keanu Reeves staring at it? Victoria had heard rumors that some movie stars took piano lessons. They did it to look smart and cultured, but they were not real musicians. They just played simple songs to impress people at parties. Victoria thought this was silly and fake. She watched Keanu for several minutes. He did not move much. He just kept looking at the piano with a strange expression on his face. It was not the look of someone who wanted to show off. It was something else, something deeper. This made Victoria curious and a little annoyed. Victoria decided to get closer. She walked slowly across the ballroom, stopping to say hello to people she knew. She wanted to seem casual, like she was not really watching Keanu. But she was. She moved from table to table, getting closer to where he sat. When she was close enough, Victoria could see Keanu's face better. He looked tired, but not in a sleepy way. He looked like someone who had been thinking about serious things for a long time. His dark eyes stayed focused on the piano. Sometimes his fingers would move slightly, like he was playing invisible keys on the table. This made Victoria even more curious. Real musicians did that. When they heard music in their heads, their fingers would move automatically. It was something That happened after years of practice. But why would a movie star do that? Did Keanu Reeves actually know how to play piano? Victoria had heard some stories about Keanu. People said he was different from other Hollywood actors. They said he was kind to people who worked on his movies. They said he gave away millions of dollars to charity, but never talked about it. They said he rode the subway in New York instead of taking expensive cars. Some people even said he knew martial arts and did his own stunts in movies. But playing piano was different. Piano was Victoria's world. It took real skill and years of training. You could not fake it. Either you could play or you could not. There was no in between. Victoria finished her champagne and put the empty glass on a nearby table. She smoothed down her dress and checked her hair in the reflection of a mirror on the wall. Then she started walking toward Keanu's table. She told herself she was just being friendly, just saying hello to a famous person. But deep down, Victoria knew she had other reasons. If Keanu Reeves thought he could play piano, Victoria wanted to know about it. And if he was just pretending, like so many celebrities did, she wanted to prove it. Victoria had spent her whole life becoming perfect at piano. She had given up friends and fun and normal things that other people did. She had practiced for hours every day since she was a child. Her fingers had calluses from playing so much. Her back hurt from sitting at the piano bench for so long. All of this hard work had made Victoria the best. She was not going to let some movie star make piano look easy. Real music was serious business. It deserved respect. As Victoria got closer to Keanu's table, she felt her heart beat a little faster. She was excited and nervous at the same time. She did not know what she was going to say to him, but she knew this night was about to become much more interesting. Victoria walked up to Keanu's table with confidence. She had done this many times before with other celebrities. Usually, they were excited to meet a famous pianist. They would ask her to play something or tell them about classical music. Victoria always enjoyed these conversations because they made her feel important and smart. But when she reached Keanu's table, something felt different. He looked up at her with calm, dark eyes. There was no excitement in his face, no fake smile like other celebrities used. He just looked at her quietly, waiting to see what she wanted. "Excuse me," Victoria said, using her most polite voice. "Are you Keanu Reeves?" Keanu nodded slowly. "Yes, I am." "And you are?" "Victoria Sterling," she said, waiting for him to recognize her name. When he did not react, she added, "I'm a classical pianist. I've played at Carnegie Hall." "That's impressive," Keanu said. His voice was soft and deep. "Do you enjoy it?" The question surprised Victoria. Most people asked her how she got so good or how much she practiced. They never asked if she enjoyed it. "Of course, I enjoy it," she said quickly. "I've been playing since I was 4 years old." Keanu nodded again. "That's a long time. You must be very dedicated." Victoria felt like the conversation was not going the way she wanted. She had expected Keanu to be more impressed, or maybe to ask her to play something. Instead, he seemed calm and uninterested. This annoyed her. "I couldn't help but notice you looking at the piano," Victoria said, pointing toward the stage. "Do you play?" For the first time, Keanu's expression changed slightly. He looked back at the piano, then at Victoria. "A little," he said quietly. "Nothing serious." Victoria felt a spark of excitement. This was what she had been hoping for. "How little?" she asked, sitting down in the empty chair across from him without being invited. Keanu seemed uncomfortable with her directness. "I just play for myself sometimes. Simple songs. It helps me relax." "What kind of simple songs?" Victoria pressed. She was getting more interested now. "Pop music, movie themes." "Sometimes," Keanu said. "Sometimes classical pieces too, but I'm not very good at them." Victoria's eyes lit up. Classical pieces. So he did think he could play real music. This was even better than she had hoped. "Which classical pieces?" she asked. Keanu looked like he wished he had not mentioned classical music. "Just some Chopin, some Debussy. Like I said, I'm not very good." Victoria tried to hide her smile. Chopin and Debussy were not easy composers. They required real skill and understanding. If Keanu thought he could play their music, he was more foolish than she had imagined. These were pieces that took Victoria years to master, even with her professional training. That's wonderful, Victoria said, her voice getting louder. I love both of those composers. Chopin is so technically demanding, and Debussy requires such delicate touch and musical understanding. Keanu looked at her carefully. He seemed to sense that she was testing him somehow. I know I don't play them well, he said. I just enjoy trying. Oh, I'm sure you're being modest, Victoria said. By now, she had drunk 3 glasses of champagne, and it was making her bolder. Most people think they can play classical music, but it's much harder than it looks. I agree, Keanu said simply. That's why I stick to playing alone. But Victoria was not ready to let this go. An idea was forming in her mind. A delicious, exciting idea. What if she could show everyone at this fancy party what real piano playing looked like? What if she could prove once and for all that classical music was not something you could just pick up as a hobby? You know, Victoria said, leaning forward. I'm supposed to play tonight anyway. For the charity. Maybe you'd like to play something too? I'm sure everyone would love to hear you. Keanu's face immediately became more serious. No, thank you. I don't play for other people. Why not? Victoria asked. Are you shy? It's not about being shy, Keanu said. I just don't think my playing is appropriate for this kind of event. Victoria's competitive side was fully awake now. She could smell weakness. Keanu was backing down because he knew he was not good enough. This was perfect. Come on, she said, her voice getting louder. It would be fun. We could even play together, or separately, whatever you prefer. I really don't think that's a good idea, Keanu said firmly, but Victoria was not listening anymore. The champagne and her own ego were driving her forward. She stood up from her chair and spoke even louder. Ladies and gentlemen, she called out to the nearby tables. Several people turned to look at her. Keanu's face went pale. Please don't, he said quietly. We have a special treat tonight, Victoria announced. The famous Keanu Reeves has just told me he plays classical piano. I think we should convince him to share his talent with us. More people were looking now. Some of them had their phones out, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Victoria felt a rush of excitement. This was going to be perfect. I'm sure Mr. Reeves is just being modest, Victoria continued. As a professional pianist myself, I can tell when someone has real musical knowledge, and I can hear it in the way he talks about Chopin and Debussy. Keanu looked very uncomfortable now. He was trapped. If he kept refusing, he would look scared or rude. But if he agreed to play, Victoria was confident he would embarrass himself. What do you say, Keanu? Victoria asked sweetly. Just one song? For charity? The crowd that had gathered was getting bigger. Someone shouted, "Come on, Keanu, play something." Others joined in, encouraging him. Victoria felt powerful and in control. This was exactly what she had wanted. Soon, everyone would see the difference between real musical training and celebrity dabbling. They would understand why she had spent her whole life studying piano. If you're worried about not being good enough, Victoria said with fake kindness, I could play first, you know, to warm up the piano. Then you could follow with something simple. She knew this would make it even harder for Keanu to refuse. By offering to play first, she was giving herself the chance to show everyone what real piano playing sounded like. Then, when Keanu played his simple little songs, the difference would be obvious to everyone. Keanu looked around at all the faces watching him. He looked trapped and tired. Victoria could see him thinking, trying to find a way out. But there was no way out. Not with so many people watching and waiting. I really don't think this is a good idea, Keanu said one more time. Nonsense, Victoria said triumphantly. Music is meant to be shared, and tonight is about charity, after all. I'm sure the Children's Hospital would appreciate any extra entertainment. She was using the charity as a weapon now, and she knew it. How could Keanu refuse to help sick children? Victoria felt clever and powerful. She had him exactly where she wanted him. The crowd was getting louder now, chanting play, play, play. Some people were recording everything with their phones. Victoria could already imagine the videos going viral. Famous pianist challenges. Keanu Reeves would be trending on social media within hours. Finally, Keanu sighed deeply and looked directly at Victoria. For a moment, she saw something in his eyes that made her feel slightly uncomfortable. It was not anger or fear. It was something else. Something that looked almost like sadness. "All right," Keanu said quietly. "But just one song. And you don't have to play first if you don't want to." Victoria's heart jumped with excitement. She had one. "Oh, but I insist on playing first," she said with a big smile. "I want to make sure the piano is properly warmed up for you." What she really wanted was to make sure everyone heard what professional piano playing sounded like before they heard Keanu's amateur attempt. The crowd around their table grew bigger by the minute. Word was spreading through the ballroom that something interesting was happening. People left their fancy dinners and expensive conversations to see what was going on. Soon, there were at least 50 people standing around Victoria and Keanu. Victoria felt like she was on stage already. This was the kind of attention she loved. Everyone was looking at her with interest and excitement. She stood straighter and smiled wider. Her green eyes sparkled with confidence and champagne, but Keanu looked very different. He sat in his chair like he wanted to disappear. His hands were clasped together on the table, and Victoria could see his knuckles were white from squeezing too hard. He kept looking around at all the faces watching him, and each new person who joined the crowd seemed to make him more uncomfortable. "This is so exciting," said a woman in a red dress who was standing nearby. "I had no idea Keanu Reeves played piano." "Neither did I," said her friend. "I can't wait to hear this." Victoria heard these comments and felt even more pleased with herself. She was creating a moment that people would remember and talk about for years. This was exactly the kind of thing that made her feel important and special. But then she noticed something that made her pause for just a second. Keanu was not looking at the crowd anymore. He was looking directly at her, and his expression was very serious. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly, so only she could hear. Victoria was surprised by the question. "Of course. Why wouldn't I?" "Because," Keanu said slowly, "this feels like you're trying to prove something. And I don't think music should be about proving things." For a moment, Victoria felt confused. What did he mean? Of course music was about proving things. It was about showing how skilled you were. It was about demonstrating years of hard work and training. It was about being better than other people. "I just think it would be fun," Victoria said, but her voice was not as confident as before. Keanu studied her face for a long moment. Then he said something that surprised her even more. "You're very talented, Victoria. I can tell just from talking to you. You don't need to prove anything to anyone." Victoria felt a strange flutter in her stomach. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. Usually, people were impressed by her achievements or her fame. But Keanu was talking about something different, something that made her feel uncertain. "I'm not trying to prove anything," she said quickly. "I just want to share music with people." But even as she said it, Victoria knew it was not completely true. She was trying to prove something. She was trying to show everyone that she was better than Keanu. She was trying to prove that real musicians were different from celebrities who played piano as a hobby. The crowd was getting restless now. People were starting to ask when the music would begin. Someone had told the charity organizers what was happening, and they were excited about the unexpected entertainment. The man who ran the event came over to talk to Victoria and Keanu. "This is wonderful," he said loudly. "What a surprise. Should we move everyone to the stage area so people can see better?" Victoria felt a moment of panic. Moving to the stage would make this feel very official and public. It would not be just a fun moment between friends anymore. It would be a real performance with a real audience. But before she could say anything, the crowd was already moving toward the stage. People were calling their friends over and taking out their phones to record. Victoria found herself being swept along with everyone else. Keanu walked beside her, but he looked like he was walking to his own execution. His face was pale, and he kept running his hands through his dark hair. Victoria wanted to say something to him, but she could not think of the right words. When they reached the stage area, someone had already moved the microphone away from the piano and adjusted the bench. The beautiful black piano sat there waiting, its lid open like a mouth ready to sing. Victoria had played on pianos like this hundreds of times, but tonight it looked different somehow. Bigger and more intimidating. The crowd arranged themselves in a semicircle around the stage. Everyone was talking excitedly and pointing at the piano. Victoria could hear pieces of their conversations. "I wonder what she'll play. Do you think he's actually any good? This is better than the regular entertainment they usually have. Someone said she's played at Carnegie Hall. Get your phone ready. This might be amazing." Victoria felt the weight of all these expectations. Everyone was excited to see something special. They wanted to be entertained and surprised. They wanted to see something they could talk about later and post on social media. But what if Keanu was actually good? Victoria had not really considered this possibility seriously before. She had been so confident that he would embarrass himself. But what if he did not? What if he played something beautiful and made her look foolish for challenging him? Victoria shook her head and pushed these thoughts away. She was being ridiculous. She was a professional who had studied at the best schools and performed with the best orchestras. Keanu was just an actor who played piano as a hobby. There was no way he could be better than her. The charity organizer stepped forward to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special surprise tonight. The wonderful Victoria Sterling, who is already scheduled to perform for us later, has agreed to play now. And we're also going to hear from the talented Keanu Reeves." The crowd applauded loudly. Victoria smiled and waved, but she noticed that Keanu did not wave back. He just stood there looking uncomfortable. "Victoria has graciously offered to play first," the organizer continued, "so let's give her our full attention." Victoria walked up the 3 steps to the stage. The piano bench was exactly the right height, and she sat down carefully, smoothing her black dress around her legs. She looked out at the crowd and felt the familiar rush of being on stage. This was where she belonged. This was what she was born to do. But then she made the mistake of looking directly at Keanu. He was standing at the edge of the crowd, and he was not looking at her with admiration or excitement like everyone else. He was looking at her with something that seemed like pity. Pity? Why would Keanu Reeves pity her? She was the one who was about to show everyone how real piano was played. She was the one with all the training and experience. She was the one who was going to win this challenge. Victoria placed her hands on the piano keys and felt their familiar coolness under her fingers. She had decided to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most difficult and impressive pieces in the classical repertoire. It was a piece that required incredible technical skill and years of practice to play correctly. She would show everyone what real piano playing looked like. She would demonstrate the difference between professional classical training and amateur hobby playing. When she was finished, Keanu's simple little songs would sound like child's play in comparison. Victoria took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes rang out clear and strong in the ballroom. The crowd immediately fell silent, impressed by the power and precision of her playing. This was it. This was her moment to shine. Victoria smiled as her fingers danced across the keys, playing the complex passages she had practiced thousands of times. She was in her element now, showing everyone exactly why she was considered one of the best pianists of her generation. But even as she played, Victoria could not shake the memory of how Keanu had looked at her, and she could not stop wondering what he was thinking as he listened to her perform. Victoria's fingers moved across the piano keys like dancers performing a perfect ballet. Each note was exactly where it should be, exactly when it should be there. The Rachmaninoff concerto poured out of the piano with mechanical perfection. Every scale was clean. Every chord was balanced. Every dramatic moment was precisely calculated for maximum effect. The crowd stood completely still, mesmerized by what they were hearing. Most of these people had never been this close to a world-class pianist before. They could see Victoria's hands moving impossibly fast, reaching across the entire keyboard with graceful arcs. They could see the concentration on her face, the slight movement of her body as she swayed with the more emotional parts of the music. Victoria felt the familiar rush of performing. This was what she lived for. This moment when she could show everyone exactly how much skill and training went into real classical music. Her back was straight, her posture perfect. Her fingers knew exactly where every key was without looking. This was the result of 28 years of dedicated practice. The piece she had chosen was not just difficult, it was one of the most challenging works in the entire piano repertoire. Rachmaninoff had huge hands and could reach notes that most pianists could not. The music required incredible speed, perfect timing, and the ability to play multiple complex melodies at the same time. Victoria played it all flawlessly. In the first movement, her left hand played deep, thundering bass notes while her right hand danced through intricate melodies high on the keyboard. The music was passionate and dramatic, full of sweeping emotions and technical fireworks. Victoria had memorized every single note years ago. She could play this piece in her sleep. The crowd was completely captured by her performance. People who had been talking and laughing just minutes before now stood like statues, afraid to make any sound that might disturb the music. Some had tears in their eyes from the beauty and power of what they were hearing. Others were simply amazed by the pure technical skill they were witnessing. Victoria could feel their amazement, and it fueled her playing. She attacked the more aggressive passages with confidence and power. When the music called for delicate, soft moments, her touch became light as feathers. She demonstrated every technique she had learned in her years of study: rapid scales, thundering octaves, delicate trills, and complex polyrhythms where her two hands played completely different patterns at the same time. This was classical music at its highest level. This was what separated real musicians from amateurs. Victoria thought about all the hours she had spent practicing this piece. She remembered her teacher at Juilliard making her play the same passage over and over until it was perfect. She remembered the competitions where she had defeated dozens of other talented pianists. She remembered the reviews in newspapers calling her playing transcendent and breathtaking. As she moved into the second movement, Victoria allowed herself to feel satisfied. The second movement was slower and more emotional, but no less challenging. It required a completely different kind of skill: the ability to sustain long, singing melodies and create subtle colors and moods. Victoria's touch became more gentle, coaxing beautiful sounds from the piano that seemed to float in the air. But even as she played this gorgeous music, Victoria was thinking about what would happen when she finished. Everyone would applaud enthusiastically. They would be impressed and moved by what they had heard. And then Keanu would have to follow this performance with whatever simple songs he knew. Victoria almost felt sorry for him. How could anyone play after hearing Rachmaninoff performed at this level? Whatever Keanu played would sound small and amateur by comparison. The crowd would be polite, but everyone would understand the difference between professional and amateur music making. This thought made Victoria play even better. She wanted to make the contrast as dramatic as possible. She wanted to set the bar so high that anything Keanu played would pale in comparison. She was not just playing music now, she was making a statement about the value of serious musical education and professional dedication. The third movement was the most challenging of all. It required lightning-fast finger work, enormous jumps across the keyboard, and the stamina to maintain intense energy for several minutes without stopping. Victoria had always been proud of her technique, and this movement was where she could really show it off. Her hands flew across the keys at an incredible speed. The notes came so fast they almost blurred together, but each one was crystal clear and perfectly placed. The music built to enormous climaxes where she had to use her entire body to create enough power and volume. Her arms moved like a conductor's, shaping phrases and building excitement. Victoria could see people in the crowd shaking their heads in amazement. Some were holding their phones up to record, but most were too captivated to think about anything except the music. She could see their faces reflecting the emotions of the music: excitement during the dramatic parts, peace during the gentle sections, and awe throughout everything. This was exactly what Victoria had hoped for. She was demonstrating the incredible complexity and beauty of classical music. She was showing everyone why she had dedicated her entire life to this art form. She was proving that real music required real skill and real understanding. As the piece approached its final climax, Victoria felt completely in control. Every note was exactly where she wanted it. Every phrase was shaped perfectly. The piano responded to her touch like an extension of her own body. This was what musical mastery looked like. The final section of the concerto was a whirlwind of technical brilliance. Victoria's hands moved faster than seemed humanly possible, playing scales and arpeggios that covered the entire keyboard. The music built to a tremendous conclusion with thundering chords that made the entire piano vibrate. Victoria struck the final chord with perfect timing and held it as the sound slowly faded into silence. For a moment, the entire ballroom was completely quiet. Even Victoria was breathing hard from the physical effort of playing such demanding music. Then the applause exploded. It was not just polite clapping, it was enthusiastic, amazed applause. People were shouting bravo and incredible. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. The sound of their appreciation filled the entire ballroom. Victoria stood up from the piano bench and took a deep bow. This was the moment she loved most, when an audience recognized her skill and artistry. She had given them something beautiful and challenging, something that most of them had never experienced before. She looked out at the crowd and saw faces full of admiration and respect. These people understood now what real piano playing was. They had heard something special, something that required years of training and natural talent to achieve. Then Victoria's eyes found Keanu in the crowd. He was clapping too, but his expression was different from everyone else's. While the other people looked amazed and excited, Keanu looked thoughtful and serious. He was not smiling like the others. He was studying her with those dark, calm eyes. For just a moment, Victoria felt a flicker of uncertainty. Why was not Keanu looking amazed like everyone else? Why did he seem so serious and thoughtful? But she pushed these questions away quickly. He was probably just nervous about having to play after such a powerful performance. Victoria smiled triumphantly as she walked down the steps from the stage. She had done exactly what she intended to do. She had shown everyone the difference between professional classical music and amateur playing. Now, it was Keanu's turn to try to follow her perfect performance. The applause was still echoing through the ballroom when Keanu began walking toward the stage. Victoria stood at the side, still breathing hard from her performance, watching him with a mixture of excitement and anticipation. She felt like a champion boxer who had just delivered a knockout punch and was waiting to see if her opponent could even get back up. But as Keanu walked, something strange happened. The confident smile on Victoria's face began to fade slightly. There was something different about the way he moved. He was not walking like someone who was nervous or defeated. He was not hurrying or hesitating. Instead, he walked slowly and calmly, like someone who was thinking deeply about something important. The crowd was still buzzing with excitement from Victoria's performance. People were talking in excited whispers about what they had just heard. Incredible, someone said. I had no idea classical music could be so powerful, said another. Victoria felt proud hearing these comments. This was exactly the reaction she had wanted. But then she noticed that some people in the crowd were watching Keanu with curious expressions. They seemed interested to see what he would do after such an amazing performance. A few people looked skeptical, like they thought it was unfair to make him play after Victoria's professional level display. Keanu reached the stage and paused at the bottom of the steps. He looked up at the piano, then out at the crowd. For a moment, Victoria thought he might change his mind and walk away. Part of her almost hoped he would. It would save him from embarrassing himself, and it would prove her point just as effectively. But Keanu did not walk away. Instead, he looked directly at Victoria. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Victoria saw something in his gaze that made her stomach flutter with unexpected nervousness. It was not fear or worry. It was something calm and steady. He knew something she did not. Thank you, Victoria, Keanu said, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom even though he was not speaking loudly. That was truly beautiful. Victoria felt surprised by his words. She had expected him to look intimidated or impressed by her technical skill. Instead, he seemed genuinely moved by the music itself. This was not the reaction she had been anticipating. Keanu climbed the 3 steps to the stage with the same calm, measured pace. When he reached the piano bench, he did not sit down immediately like Victoria had expected. Instead, he stood beside the piano for a moment, placing one hand gently on its black surface. He looked like he was greeting an old friend. The crowd grew quieter, sensing that something meaningful was about to happen. Victoria found herself holding her breath, though she was not sure why. This was supposed to be the moment when Keanu revealed that he was just an amateur who could play a few simple songs. So why did she suddenly feel so nervous? Keanu sat down on the bench and adjusted it slightly. His movements were unhurried and natural, like he had sat at piano benches thousands of times before. Victoria noticed that he did not check his posture or arrange his hands in the formal way that classically trained pianists were taught. He just sat comfortably, like he was in his own living room. He placed his hands on the keys, but did not start playing immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment and took a slow, deep breath. Victoria had never seen a performer do this before. Classical pianists were trained to begin playing immediately after sitting down, to maintain the energy and attention of the audience. But Keanu seemed to be doing something different. He seemed to be listening to something inside himself, or maybe preparing himself emotionally for what he was about to play. Victoria found herself watching him intently, trying to understand what he was doing. When Keanu finally opened his eyes and began to play, the first notes that came from the piano were so soft that some people in the back of the crowd leaned forward to hear them better. Victoria had expected him to play something obvious and simple, maybe chopsticks or a basic classical piece that every amateur pianist knew. But what she heard instead made her freeze completely. Keanu was playing Clair de Lune by Debussy, one of the most beautiful and beloved pieces in the classical repertoire. But he was not playing it the way Victoria would have played it, or the way it was taught in music schools. He was playing it like he was telling a personal story, like every note meant something special to him. The opening melody floated out of the piano like moonlight itself. Each note was placed not with mechanical precision, but with careful thought and feeling. Victoria could hear immediately that Keanu's technique was not perfect by conservatory standards. His fingering was sometimes unconventional. His timing was more flexible than strict classical training would allow. But something else was happening that Victoria had not expected. Something that made her heart start beating faster and her hands begin to tremble slightly. The music was beautiful. Not just technically correct or impressively difficult, but genuinely, deeply beautiful in a way that touched something inside everyone who heard it. Victoria watched Keanu's face as he played, and she saw something that shocked her. He was not performing for the crowd. He was not trying to impress anyone or prove anything. He was simply sharing something that was important to him, something that he loved. The melody of Clair de Lune continued to flow from the piano like a gentle river. Keanu's touch was incredibly sensitive, sometimes barely touching the keys to create whisper-soft sounds, sometimes pressing more firmly to bring out inner voices in the harmony. Victoria realized that while his technique might not be textbook perfect, his musical understanding was profound. How was this possible? How could someone who had not studied music professionally understand Debussy so deeply? Victoria had played Clair de Lune hundreds of times in recitals and competitions. She knew every note, every mark, every traditional interpretation. But listening to Keanu play it, she felt like she was hearing it for the first time. The crowd around them had fallen into complete silence, but it was a different kind of silence than they had maintained during Victoria's performance. During her Rachmaninoff, they had been impressed and amazed by her technical skill. Now, they were being moved by something harder to define, by music that seemed to speak directly to their hearts. Victoria found herself listening not as a professional pianist analyzing technique, but as a human being experiencing beauty. And that realization terrified her. She had spent her entire life believing that musical beauty came from technical perfection, from years of training and professional study. She had believed that the more difficult a piece was, the more meaningful it must be. She had believed that classical music required expert interpretation to be truly appreciated. But Keanu was proving all of these beliefs wrong with every note he played. He was creating something beautiful and meaningful without perfect technique. He was moving an audience of sophisticated people with music that was relatively simple. He was demonstrating a kind of musical understanding that had nothing to do with conservatory training. As the piece continued, Victoria felt something shifting inside her chest. It was an uncomfortable feeling, like the ground was moving beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about music, everything she had built her identity around, was being challenged by this quiet actor who played piano just for relaxation. The worst part was that Victoria could not deny what she was hearing. She could not tell herself that Keanu was just a lucky amateur who was fooling people who did not know any better. She was a professional musician with decades of training, and she knew real musical beauty when she heard it. And what she was hearing from Keanu was more genuinely musical than anything she had played in years. As Keanu continued playing Clair de Lune, Victoria felt like the world was slowly tilting around her. She stood at the edge of the crowd, watching his hands move across the keys, and tried to understand what was happening inside her own mind. The music was simple, yes. It was not technically demanding like the Rachmaninoff she had just performed. But simplicity, Victoria was beginning to realize, was not the same thing as easiness. What Keanu was doing required something that all her years of training had never taught her how to develop. He was not just playing the notes that Debussy had written. He was speaking through them. Victoria watched his face as he played, and she saw something that made her chest feel tight. Keanu looked peaceful in a way that Victoria had never felt while performing. There was no stress in his expression, no worry about making mistakes or impressing the audience. He looked like someone who was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what brought him joy. When had Victoria last felt that way about playing piano? The question hit her like a physical blow. She tried to remember the last time she had sat down at a piano and played just because she wanted to, just because the music made her happy. But she could not remember. For years, maybe decades, every time she played piano it was for a specific purpose: to practice for a performance, to impress someone, to maintain her reputation, to prove her skill. Victoria realized that she had not played piano for pure joy since she was a very young child. The melody of Clair de Lune seemed to float through the ballroom like something alive. Each phrase breathed naturally, expanding and contracting like a sleeping person's chest. Victoria found herself listening to details she had never noticed before. Even though she had played this piece countless times, Keanu was bringing out inner voices in the harmony that most pianists ignored. He was shaping phrases in ways that were not written in any music book, but felt completely right. Most incredibly, he was making the piano sing in a way that Victoria, with all her technical training, had never quite achieved. How was this possible? Victoria thought about her own performance just minutes earlier. She had played every note of the Rachmaninoff perfectly. Her technique had been flawless. Her timing had been precise. The audience had been amazed and impressed. By every measure, she had been taught to value. Her performance had been superior to what Keanu was doing now. So, why did Keanu's simple playing make her feel like she had never really understood music at all? Victoria looked around at the faces in the crowd and saw something that disturbed her even more. During her performance, people had looked impressed and amazed. They had appreciated her skill and been entertained by the drama and power of the music. But now, listening to Keanu, their faces showed something different. They looked moved. Some had tears in their eyes. Others had gentle smiles, like they were remembering something beautiful from their past. An elderly woman near the front had closed her eyes and was swaying slightly with the music. A young man was holding his girlfriend's hand, and they were both listening with expressions of wonder. These people were not being impressed by Keanu's playing. They were being touched by it. And Victoria suddenly understood that there was a profound difference between those two things. For her entire career, Victoria had focused on impressing people. She had worked to amaze audiences with her technical skill and professional training. She had wanted people to recognize how talented and accomplished she was. She had measured her success by how much applause she received and how many positive reviews she got in newspapers. But she had never thought about whether her playing actually moved people emotionally. She had never asked whether her music made people feel something meaningful. She had been so focused on playing correctly that she had forgotten to play with heart. Keanu, meanwhile, was playing with nothing but heart. Victoria watched his hands on the keys and noticed something else that shocked her. His fingering was indeed unconventional by classical standards. Sometimes he used fingers that her teachers would have corrected. His hand position was not always textbook perfect. His pedaling was more intuitive than systematic, but none of that mattered. His imperfect technique was serving a perfect musical purpose. Every choice he made, even the ones that broke classical rules, made the music more beautiful and expressive. Victoria began to understand something that frightened her. All those years of perfect technique training, all those hours spent practicing scales and etudes and exercises, had taught her how to play the piano correctly, but they had not taught her how to make music meaningfully. She had learned to be a perfect piano-playing machine, but Keanu had somehow learned to be a musical human being. The realization hit Victoria like a wave of cold water. She had spent 28 years becoming incredibly skilled at something that suddenly felt empty and hollow. She had devoted her entire life to a version of music that impressed people, but did not touch their souls. Worse yet, she had looked down on people like Keanu who approached music differently. She had assumed that anyone without formal training was automatically inferior. She had believed that technical perfection was the highest goal a musician could achieve. But now, listening to this amateur play a simple piece with more genuine musicality than she had ever achieved, Victoria felt ashamed of her arrogance. The melody of Clair de Lune continued to weave its gentle spell over the ballroom. Victoria closed her eyes and tried to really listen, not as a critic analyzing technique, but as a person experiencing beauty. What she heard made her want to cry. She heard longing in the way Keanu shaped certain phrases. She heard peace in the gentle spaces between notes. She heard storytelling in the way he balanced melody and harmony. She heard a lifetime of quiet moments spent alone with music, playing not for applause or recognition, but for the simple joy of creating something beautiful. Victoria opened her eyes and looked at Keanu again. He was completely absorbed in the music, unaware of the crowd watching him. His face was calm and focused, but not in the intense, competitive way that Victoria was used to seeing in professional musicians. He looked like someone who was sharing a part of his soul, and suddenly Victoria understood why he had looked at her with what seemed like pity earlier in the evening. It was not that he thought she was a bad pianist. It was that he could see she was a good pianist who had lost touch with the reason music existed in the first place. Music was not about being better than other people. It was not about impressing audiences or winning competitions or proving superior training. Music was about expressing something true and beautiful, about connecting with other human beings on a level deeper than words. Victoria had forgotten this completely, or maybe she had never really known it at all. As these thoughts raced through her mind, Victoria felt something breaking apart inside her chest. It was painful, like something important was dying, but it was also strangely liberating, like something even more important was being born. She realized that everything she had built her identity around, her perfect technique, her prestigious education, her professional achievements, her superiority over amateur musicians, was meaningless compared to what Keanu was demonstrating so effortlessly. He was showing everyone, including her, what music was really supposed to be about, and Victoria finally understood why her hands were shaking. The final notes of Clair de Lune hung in the air like delicate crystals, slowly fading into a silence that felt sacred. Keanu's hands remained on the keys for a moment after the music stopped, as if he was reluctant to break the spell he had created. Then he lifted them gently and sat quietly, looking down at the piano with the same peaceful expression he had worn while playing. Victoria stood frozen at the edge of the crowd, unable to move or speak or even breathe properly. The world around her had become strange and unfamiliar, like she was seeing everything through water. Her legs felt weak, and she had to put one hand against the wall behind her to keep from falling. The silence in the ballroom stretched on for what felt like hours, though it was probably only seconds. No one seemed to want to be the first to make noise after what they had just experienced. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, afraid that speaking or moving might somehow diminish the beauty of what they had just heard. Victoria looked around at the faces in the crowd and saw her own shock reflected in their expressions. But while they looked moved and amazed, Victoria felt like her entire understanding of reality had just been turned upside down. These were the same people who had applauded enthusiastically after her Rachmaninoff performance. They had been impressed by her technical skill and professional training. They had recognized her superior abilities and appreciated her years of dedicated study. But the way they looked now was completely different. They did not look impressed by Keanu's playing. They looked transformed by it. The elderly woman near the front had tears streaming down her cheeks. She was not crying because she was sad, but because something inside her had been touched so deeply that her emotions had overflowed. A young couple stood with their arms around each other, both staring at the piano like they had just witnessed something miraculous. Even the charity organizer, who had seen hundreds of performances at events like this, looked stunned. His mouth was slightly open, and he kept shaking his head slowly, as if he could not quite believe what he had just heard. Victoria realized that none of these people were thinking about technique or training or musical education. They were not comparing Keanu's performance to professional standards or analyzing his fingering or pedaling. They had simply been moved by something beautiful, something that spoke to them on a level that had nothing to do with musical expertise, and that realization made Victoria feel more alone than she had ever felt in her life. For 28 years, Victoria had believed that her musical education and technical skills made her special. She had thought that her ability to play difficult pieces perfectly was what separated her from ordinary people. She had built her entire identity around being better than others at something that required years of training to master. But now, she understood that all of her advantages, her perfect technique, her prestigious education, her professional experience had actually separated her from the thing that made music truly meaningful. While she had been learning to play the piano correctly, Keanu had learned to speak through it. While she had been perfecting her technical skills, he had developed something much more important: the ability to touch people's hearts with simple, honest expression. Victoria thought about all the competitions she had won, all the prestigious venues where she had performed, all the positive reviews she had received from music critics. Suddenly, none of these achievements felt meaningful anymore. They all seemed like empty victories in a game that did not matter. What mattered was what had just happened in this ballroom. A room full of people had been moved to tears by a simple piece of music played with genuine feeling. And Victoria, for all her training and skill, had never created that kind of moment for anyone. She had spent her entire career trying to prove that she was better than other musicians. But Keanu had just proved that being better was not the point of music at all. Finally, someone in the crowd began to clap. It started slowly, just one person, then another. But instead of the enthusiastic, excited applause that had followed Victoria's performance, this applause was different. It was quieter, more respectful, more grateful. It sounded like people saying, "Thank you," rather than "Bravo." The applause grew slowly, spreading through the crowd like gentle waves. People were not cheering or shouting like they had after the Rachmaninoff. They were clapping with reverence, as if they understood they had just experienced something special and rare. Victoria tried to clap along with everyone else, but her hands would not work properly. They were shaking too much, and her arms felt too heavy to lift. She stood there watching everyone else appreciate Keanu's beautiful performance, while she struggled to understand what had happened to her own sense of self. Keanu stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the crowd. His expression was humble and slightly embarrassed, like he was surprised by the response his playing had received. He nodded his thanks to the audience, but he did not take a theatrical bow like Victoria had done. He just acknowledged their appreciation quietly and began to step down from the stage. Victoria knew that this was the moment when she should say something. As the person who had challenged Keanu to play, as the professional musician who had performed before him, she should step forward and congratulate him on his beautiful performance. But she could not move. She could not speak. She could not even think clearly. Everything she had believed about music, about herself, about what made a performance valuable or meaningful, had just been destroyed by a simple piece played with genuine feeling. Victoria felt like she was standing in the ruins of her own identity, trying to figure out who she was if she was not the superior, professionally trained pianist she had always thought herself to be. People in the crowd were starting to look at her now, waiting to see what she would say or do. Some looked curious about her reaction to Keanu's performance. Others seemed to expect her to make some kind of statement as the other musician involved in this impromptu concert, but Victoria remained frozen, unable to respond to their expectations. Her mouth was open slightly, as if she had started to say something but forgotten what it was. Her green eyes, which had sparkled with confidence just an hour earlier, now looked confused and lost. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling, the accomplished classical pianist who always knew exactly what to say and do in musical situations, had absolutely no idea how to react. She had challenged Keanu expecting to prove her superiority and ended up discovering that everything she thought she knew about music was wrong. She had wanted to show everyone the difference between professional and amateur musicians, and instead learned that the most important aspects of music had nothing to do with professional training. Victoria stood there in her perfect black dress, with her perfect posture and her perfect technical skills, feeling more imperfect and uncertain than she had ever felt in her life. The confident, superior woman who had approached Keanu's table an hour earlier was gone, replaced by someone who no longer understood who she was or what she was supposed to do next. The crowd continued to look at her expectantly, waiting for some kind of response, but Victoria could only stand there, frozen in the moment when her entire understanding of herself and her art had been completely transformed. Keanu had almost reached the bottom of the stage steps when he noticed Victoria standing frozen at the edge of the crowd. While everyone else was smiling and talking quietly about what they had just heard, she looked pale and shaken, like someone who had just received shocking news. Instead of walking away from the stage area like most performers would do after finishing, Keanu stopped and looked at Victoria with concern. He could see that something was wrong, that his performance had affected her in a way he had not expected or intended. The crowd was beginning to disperse now, people returning to their tables and conversations, still talking excitedly about the unexpected musical performances they had witnessed. But Victoria remained motionless, staring at the piano as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that made no sense. Keanu walked slowly toward her, moving through the crowd with the same quiet, unhurried manner he had shown all evening. When he reached Victoria, he stood beside her for a moment without saying anything, following her gaze toward the piano. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice gentle and concerned. Victoria turned to look at him, and Keanu was surprised to see tears in her green eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She looked like someone who had been asked a question in a language she did not understand. Victoria finally managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand what just happened." Keanu studied her face carefully. He had seen this expression before, though not often. It was the look of someone whose entire worldview had just been challenged. Someone who was trying to rebuild their understanding of something they thought they knew completely. "What don't you understand?" Keanu asked gently. Victoria's eyes filled with more tears, but she tried to blink them away. "You're playing," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Technically it wasn't." She stopped and shook her head, frustrated by her inability to express what she was feeling. "It wasn't perfect by conservatory standards," Keanu finished for her, his tone understanding rather than defensive. "No," Victoria said quickly. "That's not what I meant. Yes, it wasn't technically perfect, but that's not what I'm trying to say." She looked at him with an expression that was part confusion and part desperation. "How did you do that? How did you make everyone feel so much with such a simple piece? I just played Rachmaninoff perfectly, and people were impressed. But you played Debussy and people weren't," Keanu said quietly. "Yes," Victoria whispered, moved. "And I don't understand how that's possible. I've been playing piano for 28 years. I've studied with the best teachers, performed at the most prestigious venues, won competitions that other pianists spend their whole lives trying to win. But I've never made people feel the way you just did. Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. He could see that Victoria was genuinely struggling, that his performance had somehow shaken the foundation of her musical identity. Can I ask you something? Keanu said finally. Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. When you were little, before you started studying seriously, did you enjoy playing piano? The question seemed to surprise Victoria. Yes, I think so. I must have, or I wouldn't have kept playing. Do you remember what you enjoyed about it? Victoria was quiet for a long time, thinking. I remember making up little songs, just simple melodies. And I remember how it felt when I played something, and it sounded beautiful to me, even if it was just a few notes. What did that feel like? Keanu asked. Like, Victoria paused, searching for the right words. Like I was talking, but without words. Like I was sharing something that was inside me, but that I couldn't express any other way. Keanu nodded. That's what I was doing tonight. I was sharing something that was inside me. Victoria looked at him with new understanding. But what about all the training? What about proper technique and musical education? Don't those things matter? They matter, Keanu said. Your technical skills are incredible. I could never play Rachmaninoff the way you played it tonight. But technique is just a tool. The question is what you're using the tool for. Victoria felt fresh tears starting to form. I think I've been using it to prove things instead of to say things. What have you been trying to prove? Keanu asked gently. That I'm better than other people. That all my training and education and hard work make me special. That I deserve to be respected and admired because I can do something that most people can't do. Victoria's voice was getting stronger now, as if speaking these truths out loud was helping her understand them better. But you just showed me that being better isn't the point. The point is to touch people, to move them, to share something beautiful with them. Keanu smiled for the first time since Victoria had challenged him earlier in the evening. I think you understand music better than you realize. You just got distracted by all the other things that surround it. But how do I get back to that? Victoria asked. How do I remember how to play music instead of just playing piano correctly? Maybe, Keanu said thoughtfully, you could start by playing for yourself again. Not for audiences or critics or competitions. Just for the joy of making something beautiful. Victoria nodded, then looked back at the piano on the stage. Would you? She started to say, then stopped. Would I what? Would you play something with me right now? Not for anyone else, just for us? Keanu looked surprised by the request. Are you sure? I want to remember what it feels like to play music with someone instead of competing against them, Victoria said. I want to see if I can find that little girl who used to make up melodies just because they sounded beautiful to her. Keanu nodded. I'd like that. They walked together toward the stage, ignoring the few people who noticed them, returning to the piano. Victoria sat down on one side of the bench, and Keanu sat beside her. It felt strange to share the bench with another pianist, but also comfortable in a way Victoria had not expected. What should we play? Victoria asked. Something simple, Keanu said. Something that lets us listen to each other. They began with a gentle improvisation, neither of them leading, both of them responding to what the other was playing. Victoria started with a simple melody in a major key, and Keanu added harmony underneath it. Then Keanu introduced a new melody, and Victoria found counterpoint to weave around it. It was not perfect music by any technical standard. Sometimes their ideas did not fit together smoothly. Sometimes one of them had to adjust quickly to match what the other was doing. But it was music made with joy and curiosity and mutual respect. For the first time in years, Victoria was not thinking about whether she was playing correctly. She was not worried about impressing anyone or proving anything. She was simply making music with another person, sharing ideas and feelings through sound. And as they played together, Victoria began to remember why she had fallen in love with piano in the first place. It was not because she wanted to be better than other people. It was because music was a way to express things that were too deep and too beautiful for words, When they finished playing, Victoria looked at Keanu with tears in her eyes again. But this time, they were tears of gratitude rather than confusion. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you," Keanu replied. "That was beautiful." Victoria knew that her journey back to genuine musicality would take time and work. She would have to unlearn many habits and rediscover parts of herself that she had forgotten. But for the first time in years, she was excited about that journey rather than afraid of it. The woman who had challenged Keanu Reeves to prove her superiority was gone. In her place was someone who was ready to learn what music really meant.